Slow, pan across a gleaming corporate lobby at night, marble floors, a lone janitor's cart, an old man in gray coveralls pushing a mop. His hands are weathered, knuckles cracked. He stops, looks up at a massive oil painting on the wall, a younger man in an expensive suit, smug, entitled. The plaque beneath reads, Daniel Cross, founder and CEO. The janitor stares at the painting. His jaw tightens, his eyes glisten. Then he goes back to mopping 5 years. That's how long I've been dead. At least that's what my son told everyone. The newspapers printed it. The board recorded it. The company I built with these same hands now wrapped around a mop handle, held a memorial service for me in the main conference room. Daniel gave a speech. He cried. There's a photograph of it in the company newsletter. I've seen it. He's standing at a podium in front of a framed picture of me, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief, while 200 employees bowed their heads. I was in the building that day, not in the conference room. I wasn't allowed in the conference room. I was in the basement unclogging a drain in the custodial closet. I could hear the applause through the pipes. My name is Arthur Cross. I am 71 years old, and for the last 18 months I have worked as a janitor in the company I founded, watching my son destroy everything I built, one decision at a time. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I clocked in at 5:47 a.m., put on my gray coveralls, and pushed my cart into the executive elevator. The elevator had a mirror on the back wall. I caught my reflection, silver hair, deep lines around the eyes, the stooped shoulders of a man who'd spent 5 years in a care facility being told he had dementia. I didn't have dementia, but that's a different part of the story. The elevator stopped on the 34th floor executive suite. The doors opened, and there he was. Daniel Cross, my son, 39 years old, Italian suit, hair perfectly silvered at the temples in a way that looked deliberate. He was on his phone laughing at something, and when he saw me standing in the elevator with my mop bucket, his expression flickered. Not recognition, just the brief automatic dismissal of a man who had trained himself not to see people like me. Hold the next one, he said to his assistant, a young woman in glasses who was already pressing the door close button. I don't share elevators with the cleaning staff. The doors closed. I rode the elevator back down to the basement. My hands were steady on the mop handle. My heart was not. That was a Tuesday. By Friday, everything Daniel Cross believed about his life, his company, and the father he'd buried 5 years ago would be reduced to rubble. But before I tell you about Friday, I need to tell you about the stroke and the care facility and the nurse named Rosa who believed me when no one else did, because the truth about what Daniel did didn't start with a mop and a bucket. It started with a pill I was never supposed to wake up from. Before I take you back to the beginning, drop a "still here" in the comments. I need to know you're with me. This story gets worse before it gets better, and you'll want to be here for the ending. I built Cross Industries in 1987 with $3,400 and a handshake from a man named George Faber, who owned a warehouse in Northeast Philadelphia and believed in me for reasons I still don't fully understand. I was 33 years old, recently divorced, sharing custody of a 6-year-old boy who would later become the man in the Italian suit who wouldn't share an elevator with me. Back then, Daniel was just Danny, a gap-toothed kid who followed me around the warehouse on Saturdays, picking up screws off the floor and putting them in a coffee can I'd labeled Danny's Treasure. I still have that coffee can. It's in a storage unit in Camden. Inside it are screws, washers, 3 crayons, and a drawing he made of the two of us standing in front of a building that said Cross on it. He was 7. He couldn't even spell industries yet. Cross Industries started as a commercial plumbing supply business. I'd spent 10 years as a master plumber, and I knew every supplier, every contractor, every wholesale yard within 200 miles. I knew who marked up their copper fittings and who didn't. I knew which manufacturers had quality control problems and which ones stood behind their products. I knew the business from the pipe up. By 1995, we'd expanded into HVAC. By 2002, construction materials. By 2009, we were doing $80 million in annual revenue with 340 employees across 4 states. I never took venture capital. I never took a loan I couldn't pay back within 18 months. I built it the way my father built our house in Fishtown, one brick at a time with my own hands, refusing to cut a single corner. Daniel joined the company in 2010 after business school, Wharton. I was so proud the day he graduated that I couldn't speak for the first 5 minutes of the ceremony. His mother, my ex-wife Elaine, sat 2 rows behind me with her second husband, and even that couldn't touch the pride I felt watching my boy walk across that stage. I made him start in the warehouse. He hated it. He thought it was beneath him. But I told him what my father told me. You can't run a building if you've never carried a brick. He spent 6 months in shipping and receiving. I thought it would humble him. I thought it would teach him what the company was built on. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. By 2017, Daniel was Chief Operating Officer. By 2019, he was running day-to-day operations. I was 65 years old, and I was tired in the way that men get tired when they've been carrying something heavy for 30 years without setting it down. My blood pressure was high. My sleep was poor. I'd started getting confused in meeting, forgetting names, losing the thread of conversations. I told myself it was stress. My doctor told me it was stress. My son told me it was stress. It wasn't stress. The stroke happened on a Thursday morning in March of 2019. I was in my office on the 35th floor reviewing a supplier contract when the left side of my body went numb. Not painful exactly, more like someone had unplugged my arm and leg from the rest of me. I tried to stand. My knee buckled. I grabbed the edge of my desk and pulled the entire phone system down with me. My assistant, Margaret, found me on the floor. 6 minutes later, I was conscious, but couldn't speak. My mouth was moving, but the words weren't coming. I remember her face hovering above me, terrified, tears running down her cheeks, and I remember thinking with strange, detached clarity, she's been with me 22 years. I never gave her a raise last year. I should have given her that raise. The hospital stay was 3 weeks. The recovery was supposed to be 6 months. Daniel visited me twice. The first time he held my hand and told me the company was in good hands. The second time he brought paperwork. Dad, he said, sitting beside my hospital bed with a leather folder open on his lap. The doctors say the recovery is going to be slower than we hoped. The board is concerned about leadership continuity. I need you to sign a temporary power of attorney just until you're back on your feet. My right hand was still working. I could sign. I could read, barely. The letters swam on the page, but I could make out enough. Temporary. Until recovery, my son, my boy, Danny. I signed. 3 weeks later, I was transferred to a specialized care facility in upstate Pennsylvania. Daniel told me it was the best neurological rehab center on the East Coast. He told me I'd be home by Christmas. The facility was called Oakwood Residence. It was not a neurological rehab center. It was a locked memory care unit for patients with advanced dementia. The doors required a code to exit. The windows didn't open. The other patients, my neighbors, screamed at night, wandered the hallways in confusion, forgot who they were, forgot who their children were, forgot what food was. I did not have dementia. I knew my name. I knew the date. I knew the president. I knew that my son had put me in a locked facility 200 miles from everyone I knew, and I knew, with a cold, creeping certainty that grew stronger every day, that he had no intention of letting me leave. The medication started immediately. For your recovery, the nurses said. Little white pills, little blue pills. They made my head foggy. They made my tongue thick. They made it hard to think, hard to speak, hard to stay awake. I started hiding them under my tongue and spitting them into the toilet when no one was watching. That's how I stayed lucid, that and Rosa. Rosa Martinez was a night shift nurse at Oakwood. She was 42 years old, originally from the Dominican Republic, with a son named Miguel who was applying to colleges, and a face that had seen too much suffering to be surprised by any of it. She was the only staff member who looked at me like I was a person instead of a chart number. Mr. Cross, she said one night, about 4 months into my stay, while she was checking my blood pressure. You don't belong here, do you? I looked at her. My voice was weak from months of disuse. No, I said. It was the first word I'd spoken aloud in weeks. She nodded slowly, didn't look shocked, didn't ask follow-up questions, just said, I thought so. The other patients, they have a certain look in their eyes. You don't have it. What do I have? I asked. Anger, she said, and clarity. That's a dangerous combination in a place like this. She was right. Over the next several months, Rosa became my lifeline. She smuggled me newspapers so I could track what was happening at Cross Industries. She let me use her phone once a week for 5 minutes to check the business news. She brought me a notepad and a pen, and I started writing down everything I could remember, everything I could piece together, everything I was going to do when I got out. What I learned during those months broke something in me that the stroke hadn't touched. Daniel had told the board I'd been diagnosed with advanced vascular dementia. He'd presented medical documents, forged, I would later discover, showing cognitive decline dating back 2 years before the stroke. He'd held a company-wide meeting where he tearfully announced that I was no longer capable of recognizing my own family. The power of attorney I'd signed in my hospital bed had been used to transfer my voting shares to a trust controlled by Daniel. The trust documents were structured so that if I was declared mentally incapacitated for a period of 5 continuous years, the shares would become Daniel's permanently. I had been in Oakwood for 14 months when I understood the full architecture of what he'd done. I had 46 months left before the 5-year clock ran out. I spent those 14 months getting stronger. I did physical therapy in my room when no one was watching. I walked laps in the courtyard during recreation time. I practiced speaking, reading aloud from the newspaper Rosa brought me, rebuilding the neural pathways the stroke had damaged. By the end of my second year at Oakwood, I could walk without assistance. I could speak in full sentences. I could think clearly for hours at a time. I looked like a man in his early 70s with a slight limp and a tremor in his left hand. But inside, I was 35 years old again, the man who'd built an empire from $3,400 and refused to lose. Rosa helped me file a petition for release in my third year. It was denied. Daniel's lawyers submitted medical evaluations from doctors I'd never met, affirming my severe cognitive impairment. The judge ruled in their favor. I was not going to be released through legal channels. So Rosa and I found another way. On a Thursday night in October of 2022, 3 years and 7 months after I'd been admitted, Rosa clocked out at the end of her shift, walked to the East Service entrance, and disabled the door alarm. I was waiting in the laundry room. She handed me $600 in cash, a prepaid phone, and a set of clothes she'd bought at a Goodwill in Scranton. Miguel got into Penn State, she said, her eyes bright. Full scholarship, engineering. I hugged her. I couldn't speak. When I finally found my voice, all I could say was, "I'll make this right for both of us." "Just don't get caught," she said. "And Mr. Cross, when you're ready, make sure your son understands exactly who he betrayed." I walked out of Oakwood residence at 11:47 p.m. on October 19th, 2022. The air was cold and sharp and smelled of pine. The stars were out. I hadn't seen stars in 3.5 years. I was 68 years old, legally incapacitated, with no access to my bank accounts, no identification beyond an expired driver's license, and $600 in my pocket. It was enough. Time lapse of Philadelphia streets. The old man in a cheap coat walking through rain, through neighborhoods that don't recognize him, a pawn shop, a barber shop, a cramped studio apartment. The first thing I did was become someone else. Not legally. I didn't have the resources for that yet. Practically, I bought a bus ticket to Philadelphia using cash. I rented a room in a boarding house in Kensington under the name Art Miller, my first name, my mother's maiden name. I paid $400 a month for a room the size of a walk-in closet with a shared bathroom and a hot plate for cooking. It was the most freedom I'd felt in nearly 4 years. I got a job. Not at Cross Industries, not yet. I was too recognizable, too risky. Instead, I worked at a hardware store in Fishtown, the same neighborhood where I'd grown up. The owner, a man named Tony Bertelli, was the grandson of the original Tony Bertelli, who'd owned the store when I was a kid. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? I was just another old man who needed work. I spent 6 months at that hardware store saving money, rebuilding my strength, and watching Cross Industries from the outside. The business news covered Daniel regularly. Young CEO modernizes family business. Cross Industries announces record quarterly earnings. Daniel Cross named to Philadelphia business journals 40 under 40. The articles never mentioned me. The founder, the man who'd built the company from nothing. It was as if I'd never existed. Then, in April of 2023, I saw the job posting. Cross Industries was hiring custodial staff for their headquarters building in Center City, Philadelphia. The posting was on a job board at the public library, starting wage $15.75 an hour. Requirements: high school diploma or equivalent, ability to lift 50 pounds, pass a background check. My background check would come back clean. Arthur Miller had no criminal record, no credit history, no digital footprint at all. He was a ghost, and ghosts don't show up on background checks. I applied under the name Arthur Miller. I listed Tony Bertelli as my previous employer. I used a reference from a man at the boarding house who owed me a favor. The interview was conducted by a woman named Sheila who managed the facilities department. She was in her 50s, tired around the eyes with the particular weariness of someone who'd been managing custodial staff for too long. She asked me 3 questions. Can you lift 50 pounds? Yes. Can you work nights? Yes. Do you have reliable transportation? Yes. You're hired, she said. Report to the basement on Monday at 6 a.m. Wear comfortable shoes. Just like that, I was back inside my own building. The first day was surreal. I walked through the loading dock entrance at 5:55 a.m., wearing a gray uniform with Cross Industries Facilities embroidered on the chest. The security guard checked my temporary badge, a flimsy piece of paper with my photo and the name Arthur Miller, and waved me through without a second glance. I walked the same hallways I'd designed, past the same conference rooms I'd named, beneath the same skylight I'd insisted on installing because I believed natural light made people work better. Everything was familiar and foreign at the same time, like walking through a photograph of your own life. My job was to clean the 34th through 36th floors, executive territory, Daniel's territory. The first time I saw my son in person, after 4 years of absence, 4 years of locked doors and little white pills, was in the hallway outside his office on my third day of work. He walked past me without looking up from his phone. His cologne was expensive. His shoes were polished. His hair was perfectly silver at the temples. He looked like a CEO. He looked nothing like my son. I stood there with my mop in my hand, watching him disappear into the corner office that used to be mine, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the day I read the court documents denying my release, a cold, absolute clarity about what I was going to do. But I couldn't do it yet. First, I needed to understand what had happened to my company. Over the next several months, I became invisible. That's the thing about being a janitor. No one sees you. Executives have confidential conversations while you're emptying their trash cans. Managers leave sensitive documents on their desks while you're vacuuming their carpets. The IT department leaves server rooms unlocked while you're cleaning the vents. I saw everything. I learned that Daniel had taken Cross Industries public in 2021, something I had refused to do for 30 years because I didn't want to answer to shareholders who cared more about quarterly profits than long-term stability. The IPO had raised $200 million. Daniel had used $40 million of it to buy himself a house in the Main Line, a vacation property in the Hamptons, and a private jet he used to fly to business meetings in Las Vegas. I learned that he'd fired Margaret, my assistant of 22 years, 2 weeks after I was sent to Oakwood. She'd asked too many questions. She'd wanted to visit me. She'd been told I wasn't accepting visitors. She didn't believe it. So they let her go. I learned that the company's core business, the plumbing supply division I'd spent my entire life building, had been systematically gutted. Daniel had convinced the board that legacy divisions were dragging down the stock price. He'd outsourced manufacturing to a facility in Vietnam with quality control problems that would have made me physically ill. He'd laid off 200 workers in Philadelphia, Men and women I'd known for decades, people whose children I'd watched grow up at company picnics, and replaced them with contractors making half the wage. I learned that the company was hemorrhaging money on a tech initiative Daniel had championed, a digital marketplace for construction materials that was supposed to revolutionize the industry, but had burned through $80 million in 18 months with nothing to show for it. The board was getting nervous, the shareholders were getting restless, and Daniel was getting desperate. That desperation was my opportunity. I started documenting everything. I took photographs of documents left on desks. Legally, nothing I accessed was locked. Nothing required a password. I recorded conversations in public areas, legal under Pennsylvania's one-party consent laws. I built a file, a thick file, a file that would make a federal prosecutor's mouth water, but I still couldn't act. I was Arthur Miller, a janitor with no legal standing, no access to my own assets, and a court order declaring me mentally incapacitated. If I revealed myself too soon, Daniel's lawyers would have me back in Oakwood within 48 hours. I needed two things: a lawyer who could reverse the incapacitation ruling, and a way to prove definitively, publicly, undeniably that I was Arthur Cross and that my son had committed fraud on a massive scale. The lawyer came first. His name was Lawrence Okonkwo. Lawrence was the son of Nigerian immigrants who'd settled in West Philadelphia. He'd gone to Temple Law on a scholarship, spent 10 years in the public defender's office, and then opened his own practice specializing in elder law and guardianship abuse. I found him through a legal aid clinic Rosa had mentioned before I left Oakwood. I called his office from a payphone. I was still being careful, still paranoid about leaving digital traces. His receptionist was skeptical, but when I said the words wrongful institutionalization and cross industries, Lawrence got on the phone within 5 minutes. He agreed to meet me at a diner in North Philadelphia. I told him everything. He listened for 2 hours without interrupting. When I finished, he pushed his coffee cup aside and leaned forward. "Mr. Cross," he said, "I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've seen children steal their parents' Social Security checks. I've seen nieces forge powers of attorney to take their aunts' houses. I've seen a lot of cruelty dressed up as concern." He paused. "What your son did to you is the most elaborate, systematic, and legally sophisticated version of this I've ever encountered, and I believe I can help you." "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Three things," Lawrence said. "First, a copy of the original power of attorney you signed in the hospital. I'll subpoena it from the hospital records. Second, any documentation you've gathered from inside Cross Industries that shows financial misconduct. And third," he looked at me steadily, "I need you to convince me that you're mentally competent, not because I doubt you, because I need to present you to a judge, and that judge needs to see a man who is in full command of his faculties." I smiled for the first time in what felt like years. "Mr. Okonkwo," I said, "I've been waiting 4 years to convince someone of that." The next 6 months were the busiest of my life. I was working 40 hours a week as a janitor, spending evenings and weekends gathering evidence and meeting with Lawrence whenever our schedules aligned. The evidence mounted quickly, too quickly. It was almost insulting how careless Daniel had become. He'd grown comfortable. He believed his father was locked away in a dementia ward, incapable of understanding what was happening, incapable of fighting back. He'd stopped being careful. I found an email he'd printed and left on his assistant's desk, a communication with the CFO discussing how to classify personal expenses as business development costs. The Hamptons house, the private jet, the Las Vegas trips, all of it written off as business expenses buried in the company's financial statements. I found a memo from the quality control department marked confidential, do not distribute, detailing defects in the Vietnamese-sourced products that had caused 3 major clients to cancel contracts. Daniel had overridden the QC department's recommendation and continued the outsourcing arrangement. The memo noted that Daniel's personal investment portfolio included significant holdings in the Vietnamese supplier. This was securities fraud, wire fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, the kind of charges that didn't just end careers, they ended with prison sentences. Lawrence was building a parallel case, the medical fraud. He'd obtained the hospital records from my stroke and found that the neurologist who'd signed off on my dementia diagnosis had been paid $15,000 in consulting fees by a cross-industry subsidiary 3 weeks before signing the evaluation. The doctor's name was on the check. The amount was on the check. Daniel's signature was on the check. He signed his own name, Lawrence said, shaking his head in disbelief. He didn't even try to hide it. That's not arrogance, I said. That's the assumption that no one would ever look. Well, Lawrence said, closing the file, someone looked. By March of 2024, we had enough. Lawrence filed a motion to reverse my incapacitation ruling. The hearing was scheduled for April 15th. I would need to appear in court as Arthur Cross and demonstrate to a judge that I was mentally competent, that the diagnosis had been fraudulent from the beginning. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my cramped, rented room, staring at the wall, thinking about everything that had happened. Thinking about Danny at 7 years old putting screws in a coffee can. Thinking about his graduation from Wharton, the pride in his eyes when he waved at me from the stage. Thinking about the last time I'd seen him as my son, in the hospital room, handing me a pen, telling me it was temporary. Somewhere along the way, the boy I'd raised had decided that his father was worth less than $200 million. Somewhere along the way, he'd looked at me and seen an obstacle instead of a parent. I would probably never understand exactly when that change happened, but I understood with absolute certainty that it had. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Lawrence presented the medical evidence. He called witnesses, a neurologist who'd reviewed my records and confirmed that my cognitive function was within normal ranges for a man my age. He presented the financial records showing the $15,000 consulting fee. He called Rosa Martinez, who testified, trembling but steady, about the conditions at Oakwood, about the medications I was forced to take, about my perfectly coherent conversations with her during night shifts. Daniel's lawyers fought hard. They argued that I was delusional, paranoid, that my accusations were fantasies born of dementia. They presented their own medical experts who testified that my condition was degenerative and irreversible. They argued that releasing me would put me at risk. The judge, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, no relation to Lawrence, a coincidence that still makes me wonder about divine intervention, listened to both sides without interruption. When both sides had rested, she removed her glasses and looked directly at me. "Mr. Cross," she said, "I'd like to ask you a few questions directly." I stood. My left hand was trembling, the stroke damage that never fully healed, but my voice was clear. "Ask me anything, Your Honor." She asked me about my childhood, my business, the names of my first 5 employees. I listed them without hesitation. She asked me to describe the layout of the original Cross Industries warehouse. I described every aisle, every shelf, every loading dock. She asked me what I wanted right now more than anything in the world. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "I want my son to look me in the eye and tell me why. I don't want revenge. I don't want his money. I want the truth. And then I want my company back, not because it's mine, but because 340 families depend on it, and he's running it into the ground." Judge Okonkwo put her glasses back on. She wrote something on her notepad. Then she delivered her ruling. The court finds that the original incapacitation determination was based on fraudulent medical evidence. The guardianship is hereby terminated. Mr. Cross's legal rights, including control of his personal assets and voting shares in Cross Industries, are fully restored, effective immediately. She looked at Daniel's lawyers. "I will be referring the matter of the fraudulent medical evaluation to the district attorney's office for investigation." The courtroom was silent. I turned around. Daniel was sitting in the back row. He'd been there the whole time. Our eyes met for the first time in 4 years. His face was pale, his jaw was tight. For one strange, suspended moment, he looked exactly like the 7-year-old boy who'd put screws in a coffee can, scared, lost, and waiting for his father to make everything okay. I looked away first. The next morning I went back to Cross Industries, not as Arthur Miller, not through the loading dock, through the front door. I was wearing the same suit I'd worn to the hearing, a navy blue off the rack that Lawrence had bought me. The first suit I'd owned in 4 years. It didn't fit perfectly. The shoulders were slightly too wide, but it was clean and it was mine, and I walked through the marble lobby of the building I'd built with my head held high for the first time since 2019. The security guard at the front desk, a young man named Jerome, who'd been working there for 2 years and had never seen me as anything but the janitor, looked up. His eyes went wide. He recognized my face but didn't understand the context. The janitor in a suit, walking through the front door. "Mr. Miller?" he said uncertainly. "My name is Arthur Cross," I said, "and I'm here to see my son." Daniel was in his office, my old office, on the 35th floor. I didn't take the service elevator this time. I took the executive elevator, the one he'd refused to share with me. The doors opened directly into the executive suite. His assistant, the same young woman who'd closed the elevator door on me, stood up from her desk. "Sir, you can't." "I can," I said, and walked past her. Daniel was on the phone when I opened his door. He saw me, froze mid-sentence, and set the phone down without hanging up. "Close the door," I said. He did. We stood facing each other across the desk that used to be mine. The same mahogany desk, the same leather chair, the same view of the Philadelphia skyline I'd looked at for 30 years. He'd changed nothing about the office except the photograph on the corner of the desk, a picture of himself shaking hands with the governor where my photograph of Danny at 7 had once sat. "How?" he said. His voice was barely a whisper. You got lazy, I said. You signed your own name on a bribe to a doctor. You left emails on your assistant's desk. You assumed no one would ever check. I sat down in the chair across from him, the visitor's chair, in my own office. You assumed I was exactly what you'd told everyone I was. A confused old man who didn't know what day it was. His face was working through emotions faster than he could control them. Fear, anger, shame, and something else, something deeper that I recognized because I'd felt it myself every day for 4 years. The terror of losing everything. The board meeting is tomorrow, I said. You're going to attend. You're going to sit in your chair and listen to every piece of evidence I present. And then you're going to resign, effective immediately, and cooperate fully with the federal investigation that will follow. I stood up. That's the best deal you're going to get, Daniel, from me. The prosecutors may offer you something worse. Dad. His voice cracked. He hadn't called me Dad in 4 years. I can explain. There is no explanation, I said, and there's only what you did and what happens next. I walked to the door. I'll see you at the board meeting. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't turn around. I kept the coffee can, I said. Danny's treasure, screws, washers, 3 crayons, and a drawing of the two of us. My voice was very quiet. I looked at it every night for 4 years, wondering what happened to the boy who made that drawing, wondering if he was still in use somewhere. I opened the door. I'm still wondering. The boardroom, long mahogany table, 12 chairs filled with executives in suits. The door opens. An old man walks in. The room goes silent. Some people recognize him immediately. Others are confused. Daniel is at the head of the table. He doesn't stand. The Cross Industries boardroom is on the 36th floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table that seats 16. The same table where I presided over quarterly meetings for 25 years. The same windows where I'd watched the sun rise over Philadelphia on mornings when I came in early before anyone else, just to sit and think about what we were building. On the morning of April 17th, 2024, I walked into that boardroom at exactly 9 a.m. 12 board members were already seated. Daniel was at the head of the table. Lawrence Okonkwo was beside me carrying a briefcase that contained everything we'd gathered over 6 months. Daniel's face when I walked in was the color of old newspaper. He'd spent the previous night calling lawyers trying to find some way to stop this, some legal mechanism that would keep me from exposing what he'd done. There wasn't one. The ruling was final. The evidence was overwhelming. The only thing left was the public accounting. Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I said, standing at the foot of the table, the opposite end from my son, my name is Arthur Cross. I founded this company in 1987. For the past 4 years, I have been falsely imprisoned in a locked memory care facility while my son told the world I was dying of dementia. I am not dying. I do not have dementia, and everything you have been told about my condition was a lie. The room erupted. 2 board members were on their feet. 3 were staring at Daniel with expressions that ranged from shock to fury. One woman, a board member named Elaine Harper, who'd been with the company since 2005 and had always been one of my strongest supporters, was crying. Daniel stood up. This is a misunderstanding. My father has been ill. The doctors. I held up my hand. He stopped talking. The room went quiet. Lawrence opened his briefcase and distributed the evidence packets we'd prepared. the fraudulent medical evaluation with the $15,000 consulting fee, the emails documenting personal expenses charged to the company, the quality control memos, the financial statements showing the hemorrhaging tech initiative. I walked them through every piece. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The documents spoke for themselves. When I finished, I looked at the board. This company was built on three principles: honesty, quality, and loyalty to the people who work here. My son has violated all three. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence in Daniel Cross as CEO, effective immediately. The vote was unanimous, 12-0. Daniel didn't protest. He didn't argue. He didn't try to defend himself. He just sat there staring at the table while the board stripped him of everything he'd stolen. As the meeting ended, as the board members were standing and gathering their things, Daniel finally looked up at me. His eyes were wet. His face was stripped of everything: the arrogance, the polish, the careful construction of the CEO persona. He looked like a man who'd just woken up from a very long dream and didn't recognize the world he'd woken into. "Dad," he said quietly, just the word. I walked to the head of the table. I pulled out the chair beside him, not the CEO chair, the one next to it, and sat down. "I'm going to rebuild this company," I said. "I'm going to rehire the workers you laid off. I'm going to terminate the outsourcing contracts. I'm going to fix what you broke." I paused. "And you're going to face the legal consequences of what you did. The FBI has already been contacted. Lawrence will coordinate with their investigation." Daniel's shoulders shook. A tear ran down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know," I said, but I didn't say it the way he wanted me to. I said it the way you acknowledge a fact, the way you might say, "I know it's raining." Because his sorrow, genuine or not, wasn't the point anymore. The point was the truth. The point was the company. The point was the 200 workers who'd lost their jobs. The point was 4 years I would never get back. I stood up. "The FBI agents are in the lobby. I asked them to give us this meeting first. They'll be up shortly." I walked to the door. This time I did turn around. "Daniel," I said, "I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, but I want you to know I haven't given up on you. The boy who made that drawing is still in there somewhere. I have to believe that, because believing otherwise would mean that everything I spent my life building, including you, was a waste." I opened the door. "Don't make me wrong about that." The FBI investigation lasted 11 months. Daniel accepted a plea agreement: 2 years in federal prison for wire fraud and securities fraud, with a reduced sentence in exchange for full cooperation. The doctor who'd signed the fraudulent dementia evaluation lost his medical license and received 18 months. The nursing home administrator who'd accepted kickbacks for placing patients in Oakwood was charged separately. Cross Industries was delisted from the stock exchange voluntarily at my insistence. I used my restored voting shares to take the company private again. It cost almost everything I had. I sold the mainline house. I sold the Hamptons property. I sold the private jet. I didn't care about any of it. The company was more important than the money. I rehired Margaret, my assistant of 22 years, and as chief operating officer. The first thing she did was cry. The second thing she did was ask for a raise, which I gave her. With 22 years of backdated interest she hadn't asked for, but absolutely deserved, I rehired 180 of the 200 workers Daniel had laid off. Some of them had moved on to other jobs. Some of them had retired, but most of them came back, not because I offered them more money, but because they believed in what Cross Industries had been before my son tried to destroy it. The company is smaller now than it was at its peak, but it's solid. It's honest. It's the company I built, not the company Daniel pretended to run. Daniel was released from prison after 18 months, early release for good behavior. I was notified by the Bureau of Prisons, but wasn't there to meet him. I didn't know if he wanted me there. A week after his release, I received a letter handwritten on cheap notebook paper. The handwriting was uneven, nothing like the confident signature he'd once used to sign million-dollar contracts, but it was his. Dad, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't. I've spent the last 18 months thinking about everything, the company, the money, the lies, you. I don't have an explanation that makes sense. I don't think one exists. I wanted the approval of people who didn't matter. I wanted to prove I was more than just your son. I wanted to be the one who built something, even if I had to destroy what you built to do it. It was wrong, all of it. And I know that now in a way I couldn't know before because I've had nothing but time to think about it. I'm living in a halfway house in Camden. I have a job at a hardware store, the one on Girard Avenue, the one you used to take me to when I was a kid. The owner doesn't know who I am, just thinks I'm a guy trying to get back on his feet. I sweep floors, I stock shelves, I help customers find the right size screws. I think about those Saturdays with you a lot. The coffee can, Danny's treasure. I still remember every item inside it. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't forgive me. But I want you to know I'm trying to be someone worth forgiving. It might take the rest of my life, but I'm trying. Your son Daniel read the letter 3 times. Then I went to the storage unit in Camden. The coffee can was exactly where I'd left it, on a shelf in the back, next to a box of old tax returns. I pulled it down, pried off the rusted lid, and looked inside. Screws, washers, 3 crayons, red, blue, green, and the drawing. A stick figure man in a hat, a smaller stick figure beside him, standing in front of a building with a crooked sign that said Cross. At the bottom, in a 7-year-old's handwriting, me and Dad. I put the lid back on. I drove to the hardware store on Girard Avenue. Through the window, I could see him, my son. He was wearing a blue apron, sweeping the floor, his back to the door. He moved slowly, carefully, the way people move when they're learning to live with shame, when they're trying to build something small and honest after a lifetime of reaching for things that were never theirs. I stood outside for a long time, long enough that the sun started to set and the streetlights came on, long enough that the store's closing time sign flickered on in the window. Then I pushed open the door. The bell above the door chimed. Daniel turned around. He saw me. The broom stopped moving in his hands. His face did something complicated. Hope and fear and shame all fighting for control, none of them winning. I walked toward him. I set the coffee can on the counter between us. You forgot this, I said. He stared at the can. He stared at me. His chin trembled. His eyes filled. A sound came out of him that wasn't quite a word. Something between a sob and a question. Dinner's at 6, I said. Same place as always. Don't be late. I turned and walked out. The bell chimed behind me. The Philadelphia night was cool and clear, and the stars were out. And somewhere in the distance, the city I'd spent my life building was still standing. Some things, the important thing, can be rebuilt. Slow pullback from the hardware store at dusk. The lights inside flicker on, two figures visible through the window. One old, one younger, not touching, not speaking, just standing together. The coffee can on the counter between them fade to black. I'm 71 years old now. I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been dead, and I've been a janitor in my own building. And here's what I know: the things that matter, and dignity, truth, the people you love, those things are always worth fighting for. Even when the fight takes years, even when the people you're fighting for are the same people who betrayed you. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's not pretending the damage never happened. Forgiveness is deciding that the person who hurt you is more than the worst thing they ever did. It's leaving the coffee can on the counter and walking away, not because you've forgotten, but because you've chosen to believe in the possibility of something better. If this story meant something to you, and if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, or if you're still in the middle of it, or if you're trying to find your way back, drop a number in the comments. 1, if you're still fighting. 2, if you've found your way back. 3, if you're the one trying to make things right. And if you're new to this channel, welcome to Dad's Revenge episodes. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. These aren't just stories, these are lessons, hard-earned, honest, true, where it counts. I'll see you in the next one.